A single dad saw little twin girls begging to pay for bread, counting every penny with trembling fingers, their worn shoes barely holding together against the winter cold. What he discovered about them would shatter his heart. But what he did next, it would change everything, not just for two desperate little girls, but for an entire community. This is the story of how one moment in a bakery line transformed four broken lives into something unthinkable. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The coins scattered across the bakery counter like fallen hopes, $3.47 in nickels, dimes, and pennies that two small hands kept recounting as if the math might somehow change. "Please, ma'am, is it enough now?" a tiny voice whispered. Luke Brennan's hand froze halfway to his wallet. He'd been standing in line at Kowalski's bakery, absently scrolling through work emails while his 7-year-old son Jerry tugged at his jacket, begging for chocolate chip cookies. But now his attention locked onto the scene unfolding at the counter. Two little girls, twins by the look of them, stood on their tiptoes, barely able to see over the counter's edge. Their blonde hair tangled around their faces, purple jackets worn thin at the elbows, but it was their shoes that made Luke's chest tighten. Sneakers with holes near the toes, inadequate for the November chill that had already settled over Millbridge. "I'm sorry, sweethearts," Mrs. Kowalski said, her usually stern face softening. "The cheapest loaf is $4.50. The taller twin bit her lower lip, a gesture so familiar it made Luke's breath catch. Jerry did the same thing when trying not to cry. "Maybe," the smaller twin whispered to her sister, "maybe if we don't eat lunch tomorrow at school, we can save enough?" Those words, those 13 words, changed everything. Luke stepped forward, his body moving before his mind could stop it. But as he reached for his wallet, something made him pause. These girls were alone, 6 years old at most, buying bread by themselves, talking about skipping meals. "Excuse me," Luke said gently, crouching down to their level. The twins spun around, eyes wide with the wariness of children who'd learned to be careful. "I'm Luke. This is my son Jerry. Are you girls here by yourselves?" The twins exchanged a look, an entire conversation in a single glance that spoke of shared secrets and survival strategies no children should need. "Our grandma sent us," the taller one said. She's not feeling good today." "What are your names?" Jerry asked, stepping out from behind his father with the natural curiosity that hadn't been dimmed despite everything he'd been through. "I'm Grace. This is my sister Ella." Grace and Ella. Luke's mind caught on those names, chosen by parents who had dreams for their daughters. Where were those parents now?
"Mrs. Kowalski," Luke said, standing up. "Decision made. I'll cover their bread. Actually, give them 2 loaves, and add a dozen of your day-old pastries." The twins' eyes widened to impossible proportions. "We can't," Grace protested, though her voice wavered. "Grandma said not to take charity from strangers." "It's not charity," Luke said firmly, remembering words someone had once said to him in his darkest hour. "It's neighbors helping neighbors. That's what we do here in Millbridge." As Mrs. Kowalski bagged the items, Luke watched Ella's small fingers trace the edge of the bread bag with something like reverence. When did bread become a luxury for children? "Where do you live?" he asked casually, though his heart was anything but casual. Ella pointed vaguely eastward. "The blue apartment building on Maple Street. Apartment 2C. Luke knew that building. He'd driven past it countless times on his way to Gary's school, never really seeing it. The low-income housing complex that the city council kept promising to renovate, but never did. The girls left with profuse thanks, bags clutched against their chests like treasures. Luke watched them through the bakery window as they walked down the street, Grace holding Ella's hand protectively, both of them leaning into the wind. "Dad," Jerry said quietly, "why were they alone?" Luke didn't have an answer, but standing there watching those 2 small figures disappear around the corner, he felt something shift inside him, something that had been frozen since
"Come on, buddy," he said, ruffling Jerry's hair. "Let's go home." But home felt different that night. After Jerry was asleep, Luke sat at his kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from him, Margaret's chair. 2 years, and he still couldn't bring himself to sit in it. The grief counselor had said it was normal, that everyone processed loss differently. But what about those girls? What loss were they processing? The next morning, Luke did something he hadn't done in months. He reached out to someone for help. His neighbor, Patricia, worked at the elementary school. Over coffee, trying to sound casual, he asked about the twins. Patricia's face immediately clouded. "Oh, the Anderson girls. Such a heartbreaking situation. What happened to them?" Patricia stirred her coffee slowly, considering. Their mother died 6 months ago, severe asthma attack that led to complications. She was only 28. The girls moved in with their grandmother, Ruth. But, Ruth's 71, Luke. She's doing her best, but she was just diagnosed with severe arthritis. Had to leave her job at the laundromat. They're surviving on her Social Security and whatever food stamps they qualify for.
What about their father? Never in the picture. Ruth's too proud to ask for help. And the girls? Patricia shook her head. They're so young, but they're already trying to take care of her instead of the other way around. That weekend, Luke stood outside apartment 2C holding 2 bags of groceries, Jerry beside him with a box of toys he'd insisted on bringing. His knock was soft, uncertain. The door opened a crack, secured by a chain. One blue eye peered out. Ruth Anderson, Luke presumed. "Yes?" "Mrs. Anderson, I'm Luke Brennan. I met your granddaughters at the bakery earlier this week." The eye narrowed with suspicion. "My son Jerry and I, we accidentally bought too much at the store. We thought maybe we don't need charity." The voice was firm, but tired. So deeply tired. "It's not charity," Luke said, using the same words he'd used at the bakery. Then, inspired, he added, "Actually, you'd be doing me a favor. Jerry here lost his mom 2 years ago. He needs friends, and your girls seem really sweet. Maybe they could play together sometime." The door closed. Luke's heart sank. Then he heard the chains sliding free. Ruth Anderson was thin, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, despite the pain Luke could see etched in every line of her face. Behind her, Grace and Ella peered out, eyes lighting up when they saw Jerry. "You're the man from the bakery," Ella whispered. "Just neighbors," Luke said gently. "Neighbors who bought too much milk and bread." Ruth's pride warred with necessity on her face. Luke recognized that battle. He'd fought it himself after Margaret died, when people had tried to help. Perhaps the children could play for a bit," Ruth finally said. That was the beginning. Saturday lunches became a tradition. Luke would bring food, always too much, always accidentally. The girls would play with Jerry, their laughter filling the small apartment with something it had been missing. And slowly, carefully, like coaxing a wounded bird to trust, Luke learned their story. Grace loved to draw, but only had the stubby pencils from school. She'd create elaborate worlds on the backs of junk mail envelopes, cities and castles where families were always complete and no one ever left. Ella was the reader, devouring the same 12 books in the apartment so many times she could recite them. "My mom used to take us to the library," she told Luke one day, then quickly added, "but Grandma's knees hurt too much to walk that far." Jerry, who'd become withdrawn since losing his mother, began to bloom again. He taught the girls his favorite card games, shared his toys without being asked, and one day Luke heard him laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. But it was Ruth who broke Luke's heart the most. She'd been a teacher once, before arthritis stole her mobility and medical bills stole her savings. She'd raised her daughter alone, watched her graduate high school with honors, celebrated when she'd gotten a job at the local hospital. Then, asthma, a genetic curse that had skipped Ruth's generation, had taken her daughter in a matter of days. "I promised her," Ruth said one evening, watching the children play. "As she was dying, I promised I'd take care of them. But look at me.
I can barely take care of myself." "You're doing amazing," Luke said firmly. "Those girls are lucky to have you." "Lucky?" Ruth laughed bitterly. "They count coins for bread, Luke. They're 6 years old and they're already learning that life is about not having enough." That night, Luke lay awake thinking about Margaret. She'd been the one who always knew what to do, who'd see a need and fill it without hesitation. "The world's too dark to not be someone's light," she used to say. What would she think of him now, living in his grief while 2 little girls learned to be hungry? January arrived with a vengeance. Temperatures plummeting, snow piling high. Luke had quietly paid the heating bill for apartment 2C, claiming a mix-up with the utility company. He'd bought the girls' winter coats from a store-closing sale that didn't exist. Small acts, careful not to wound Ruth's pride. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. Ruth's voice was barely recognizable through the tears. "Luke, I don't know who else to call. I got an eviction notice. I'm 2 months behind on rent. I thought I could catch up, but the medicine costs, and the heating bill last month before you—" She stopped, probably realizing she'd admitted to knowing about his help. "It's $1,800. I don't have it. I don't have anywhere close to it." Luke closed his eyes. $1,800. To Ruth, it might as well have been 18,000. To him, "Don't worry," he heard himself say. "We'll figure it out." "You can't ask me to." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Give me tonight to think."
After hanging up, Luke sat in Margaret's chair for the first time since she died. It felt like a betrayal and a homecoming all at once. He thought about his emergency fund, the money he'd carefully saved, his new car fund, the vacation he'd planned to take Jerry on next summer, all the responsible, reasonable things to do with money. Then he thought about Grace and Ella, counting coins for bread. Luke opened his laptop and did 2 things that would have seemed unthinkable just months ago. First, he transferred $2,000 to his checking account. Second, he created an anonymous GoFundMe page. He wrote their story, changed names, but kept the truth. 2 little girls who'd lost their mother, a grandmother doing her best despite crippling arthritis, a community that had the power to change their lives. He shared it in the local Millbridge Facebook group at midnight and went to bed, not expecting much. By morning, everything had exploded. Luke woke to his phone buzzing incessantly. The GoFundMe had raised $3,000 overnight. By noon, it was at $7,500. Local businesses were commenting, offering jobs Ruth could do from home. A retired teacher volunteered to tutor the girls. The children's clothing store downtown offered to outfit them for the rest of winter. But the comments that made Luke cry, really cry, for the first time since Margaret's funeral. "My daughter goes to school with these girls. I had no idea. Count me in. Ruth taught my son 20 years ago. Best teacher he ever had. Time to pay it back. I was that kid once, counting coins. Someone help me. Now it's my turn." By 48 hours, they'd raised $12,000. Luke drove to apartment 2C with a check, Jerry bouncing beside him with excitement. When Ruth opened the door, he simply handed her the paper. She looked at it, looked at him, and her knees buckled. Luke caught her, guided her to the couch, while the girls rushed over in alarm. "Grandma, are you okay?" Grace cried. Ruth was sobbing, the kind of sobs that come from months of holding everything together, finally being able to let go. "These are happy tears," she managed. "Mr. Luke, he saved us." "Not me," Luke said firmly. "The community. Turns out Millbridge takes care of its own." But he wasn't done. The unthinkable act wasn't the money. It was what came next. February brought paperwork and lawyer meetings that Luke kept secret. He was setting up an education trust fund for the girls, funded with $20,000 from his savings, money he'd earmarked for things that suddenly seemed meaningless compared to 2 bright futures. But even that wasn't the most unthinkable thing.
"I need to talk to you about something," Luke told Ruth one Saturday after lunch. The kids were in the living room, Jerry teaching the twins a new card game. If this is about the money, it's not about money. It's about the future. Luke pulled out a folder. I've been thinking, you're not young, Ruth. And with your health, Ruth's face tightened. If you're suggesting I can't care for them, no, Luke said quickly. You're doing an amazing job. But what if something happens? What's the plan? Ruth's silence was answer enough. I want to become their emergency guardian. Legal paperwork that says if anything happens to you, they come to me. They don't go into the system. They don't get separated. They stay here in Millbridge, in their school, with Jerry. Ruth stared at him. You're a single father. You've already got Jerry to think about. Jerry's the one who actually gave me the idea. He asked me last week if Grace and Ella could be his sisters. When I explained they had a grandmother, he said, but what if she goes to heaven like Mom? Would they have to leave? Out of the mouths of babes, Ruth whispered. I'm not trying to replace you. I'm not trying to take them. I just want you to have peace of mind that no matter what, they'll be okay. Ruth reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were gnarled with arthritis, but her grip was strong. Why? She asked. Why would you do this for strangers? Luke thought about Margaret, about grief, about the empty chair that didn't feel so empty anymore.
Because they're not strangers anymore, he said simply. They're family. The transformation over the next months was remarkable. With the financial pressure lifted, Ruth's health stabilized. She began teaching knitting classes at the community center, her dignity restored, not through charity, but through purpose. The apartment that had once felt like a way station became a home. Grace, with proper art supplies Luke had quietly provided, won the district-wide elementary art contest. Her picture? A family portrait. Her and Ella, Grandma Ruth, Luke and Jerry, all holding hands in front of a bakery. Jerry had found not just friends, but the sisters he'd never known he needed. His grief counselor remarked on his remarkable progress, how helping others had helped him process his own loss. But perhaps the most beautiful change was in Luke himself. The house that had felt like a mausoleum to Margaret's memory became filled with children's laughter. Weekend sleepovers, art projects covering the refrigerator, 3 small heads bent over homework at the kitchen table. She would have loved this, Patricia said one day, watching Luke help Grace with a painting while Jerry and Ella built a fort. She would have done it sooner, Luke replied. She always saw what needed doing. May brought unexpected attention. A reporter from the regional newspaper had been digging into the GoFundMe story, trying to find the anonymous creator who'd started it all. Digital breadcrumbs led back to Luke. Why should we run this story? The reporter asked over the phone. Luke thought about it. Because it's not about me. It's about what happens when we actually see each other. Those girls were invisible to everyone, including me, until that day in the bakery. How many other Graces and Ellas are out there, counting coins, skipping lunches, invisible in plain sight? The story ran with the headline, "The Bread That Started It All," how one single dad's simple act changed 3 lives. But Luke knew the headline was wrong. It hadn't changed 3 lives. It had changed 4. Maybe more. The ripples were still spreading.
Every community has families struggling in silence. What would happen if we all just stopped and looked? Really looked. 3 years have passed now since that November day in the bakery. Luke still stops by to see Ruth, though she lives in a better apartment now, one without drafts and broken appliances. The community that rallied around them created a fund for other struggling families called Bread and Hope. Grace, now 9, just won a statewide art competition. The prize? A full scholarship to summer art camp. Her winning piece was titled "The Day Everything Changed." A bakery scene, 2 small girls, a father and son, and an old woman in the background, all connected by threads of golden light. Ella, also 9, reads at a high school level and has started writing her own stories. Her first one was about 2 sisters who discovered they had magical powers, the power to bring communities together. Jerry, 10 now, proudly introduces Grace and Ella as his almost sisters. He stopped asking when they were going to be real sisters. He's learned that family isn't always about official titles. Ruth, against all odds, is thriving. The arthritis is managed, the financial stress gone. She's become a pillar of the community again, teaching not just knitting, but life skills to young mothers at the community center. She jokes that she's collecting grandchildren. Half the neighborhood kids call her Grandma Ruth now. And Luke? He stands in his kitchen sometimes, watching 3 kids do homework at the table, and thinks about that empty chair that used to haunt him. It's not empty anymore. Sometimes Ruth sits there, sometimes one of the kids, sometimes he even sits in it himself, having learned that honoring the dead doesn't mean living in emptiness. The trust fund he set up quietly grows, waiting for 2 brilliant girls who once counted coins for bread to one day count themselves among college graduates. Ruth doesn't know the full amount yet. Luke's saving that revelation for their high school graduation.
Last week, Luke took all 3 kids to Kowalski's bakery. Mrs. Kowalski, now in her 70s, still works the counter. "The usual?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Actually," Grace said, stepping forward with money she'd earned from selling her art cards, "I'd like to pay for that family's bread." Luke followed her gaze. A young mother with 2 small children was counting change at the counter, coming up short. "All of it," Ella added, putting her babysitting money next to her sister's earnings. "And add some of those day-old pastries." Jerry stepped forward with his allowance. "Make it a dozen pastries." Luke watched his son, his children really, walk over to the struggling family. Watched them crouch down to the little one's level. Heard Grace say, "It's not charity. It's neighbors helping neighbors." The cycle continues. Standing there, Luke finally understood what the unthinkable really was. It wasn't the money he'd given or the papers he'd signed. It wasn't the trust fund or the guardian status. The unthinkable was that in a world that teaches us to mind our own business, to protect what's ours, to build higher fences, he'd chosen to see 2 little girls as more than strangers. He'd chosen to believe that his heart, broken by loss, was still big enough to love children who weren't his own. The unthinkable was love in action, wearing work clothes and showing up day after day. The unthinkable was a community remembering how to be a community. The unthinkable was 3 children who'd lost so much, finding everything they needed in each other. Some people might say Luke saved those girls, but sitting in his no longer empty kitchen, listening to Grace help Ella with math while Jerry practices his reading aloud, Luke knows the truth. They saved each other. Every single one of them had been counting coins of a different kind, measuring out their grief in careful portions, rationing their hope like bread, until one November day when a simple act of seeing, really seeing, changed everything. If this story touched your heart, remember, there are Graces and Ellas in every community, in every school, on every street. They're counting coins, skipping meals, wearing shoes with holes. The question isn't whether they exist. The question is, what will you do when you see them? Share this story if you believe one person really can make a difference. Luke doesn't consider himself a hero. Heroes do impossible things. All he did was possible things that most people think are impossible. He saw a need and filled it. He had space in his heart and his home, and he opened both. The bread that started it all still sits on the counter at Kowalski's bakery, the same kind the girls couldn't afford that day. Mrs. Kowalski keeps it at the exact same price, $4.50. She says it's a reminder that sometimes the smallest gaps, $1.03 in this case, can feel impossible to bridge alone. But nobody bridges them alone anymore, not in Millbridge, because one single dad did the unthinkable. He stopped, he saw, he acted, and in doing so, he taught an entire town that unthinkable is just another word for love brave enough to show up. The girls still call him Mr. Luke, although sometimes, when they think he's not listening, he hears them call him something else. something that makes his heart simultaneously break and soar. They call him Dad, and that might be the most unthinkable thing of all. Not that a stranger would help them, not that a community would rally, not even that a single father would take on the legal responsibility for 2 more children. The unthinkable thing is that in a world full of loss, they all found a way to be found. In a world full of counting coins and measuring lack, they discovered abundance was never about money. It was about seeing each other, really seeing. And once you see, really see, doing the unthinkable becomes the only thing that makes sense. Ruth sometimes asks Luke if he regrets it, taking on so much. He always gives the same answer. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to see them. But they see each other now, all of them. And in that seeing, in that simple act of recognition, they've built something unbreakable. A family born, not from blood, but from bread. A community reborn from compassion. A future rewritten by the unthinkable act of caring about someone else's children as much as your own. The trust fund grows, the children grow, the community grows. And somewhere, Margaret smiles. Friends, if this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, if it reminded you of the power we all have to change someone's life with a simple act of kindness, please don't just watch and walk away. Hit that subscribe button and join our Ever Bells Stories family.